Kate was already fragile. Weeks in the hospital had drained her strength, her privacy, and her trust. The public saw smiles and old photographs, but behind closed doors, everything had changed. According to accounts shared within royal circles, Kate believed the worst was behind her. Doctors had reassured her. Family had promised support. And she assumed that, while she was confined to a hospital bed, loyalty would remain intact. She was wrong. What happened next did not come from the press. It did not come from social media. It came from someone she never expected to speak. A guard. A man whose job was silence. A man trained to observe, not intervene. A man who had stood watch for years without emotion, without bias. When he finally spoke, his words did not accuse. He simply described. He explained that during Kate's hospitalization, certain decisions were made without her knowledge. Access was controlled. Messages were redirected. Names that Kate trusted were quietly removed from her circle. And according to this account, Camilla was present for those decisions. Not loudly, not publicly, but deliberately. The guard stated that schedules were altered while Kate was sedated. That private briefings occurred while Kate was unaware. That personal matters were discussed in rooms Kate was meant to return to. When Kate heard this, she didn't respond immediately. She asked one question. "Are you sure?" The guard did not raise his voice. He did not embellish. He simply said he had logged what he saw, as he was trained to do. That was when Kate's composure began to break. Because this wasn't about protocol. It wasn't about hierarchy. It was about trust. Shattered in the one moment she had been most vulnerable. As the account continued, Kate reportedly lowered her head. Her hands trembled. Her breathing changed. And then, according to those present, she cried. Not quietly, not politely. She collapsed into sobs that could no longer be restrained. For Kate, the pain was not just what was done, but when it was done, while she was in a hospital bed, unable to protect herself, unable to speak. And this was only the beginning. After the initial shock, Kate reportedly tried to regain control. She wiped her tears. She sat upright, but something in her had shifted. Those who later spoke about the moment said her silence was heavier than any outburst. The guard continued, careful with his words. He clarified that no single action stood alone. It was a pattern, a quiet reorganization of influence. According to his account, Camilla's involvement was not emotional. It was strategic. Meetings held under the guise of routine. Instructions framed as temporary. Assurances given that Kate would understand later. Later never came. When Kate asked why she was never informed, the guard said the response was always the same. She doesn't need to know right now. Those words, more than anything else, broke her, because they implied something unspoken, that her absence was being treated as opportunity. Kate reportedly whispered that she had defended Camilla in the past, that she had chosen patience over confrontation, that she believed respect went both ways. But listening to the account, she realized something painful. Respect had not protected her. At one point, the guard stopped speaking, not because he had finished, but because Kate could no longer listen without shaking. She reportedly asked him to leave, and when the door closed, the room went quiet. No cameras, no aides, no audience, just a woman processing betrayal. According to those familiar with the aftermath, Kate did not lash out. She did not call the press. She did not demand explanations. Instead, she withdrew, and in royal circles, withdrawal is never accidental. It is calculated. It is protective. And it signals that something has fundamentally changed. What the guard revealed did not just affect Kate's emotions, alter how she viewed her place, her safety, and her future. Because if decisions could be made while she was hospitalized, what could happen when she wasn't watching? And that question, more than the tears, is what continues to haunt the palace today. In the days that followed, Kate reportedly replayed every detail in her mind. Not just what the guard said, but what it meant. According to people close to her, she began questioning past moments that once seemed insignificant. Canceled visits, delayed updates, sudden changes she had accepted without resistance. Now, they felt deliberate. The guard's account had unlocked a realization Kate could no longer ignore. Her vulnerability had been used as cover. Her silence had been mistaken for consent. Sources claim Kate asked for internal records, not aggressively, not emotionally, but firmly, and what she saw only deepened the wound. Entries marked as routine. Decisions logged without her approval. Names attached that she had not authorized. Camilla's presence appeared again and again, never as the face of decision, but always nearby, always informed, always positioned. According to one account, Kate stared at the documents for several minutes without speaking. Then she said something that stunned those around her. "So I disappeared and things moved on." That sentence wasn't anger. It was grief, because in that moment, Kate understood something painfully clear. Her role was considered replaceable when she was weakest. The emotional collapse that followed was not public, but it was intense. She reportedly broke down again, this time alone. No guard, no witnesses, just the weight of realization pressing in. This was no longer about Camilla alone. It was about power, control, and what happens when someone assumes you won't fight back. According to insiders, Kate made a decision during that period of isolation. Not one announced, not one explained. A decision to observe, to remember, and to never again be unaware. She stopped asking questions that could be dismissed. She started noting who spoke and who avoided eye contact. Because once trust collapses, every silence becomes loud. And while the palace continued its routines, Kate was no longer the same woman who had entered that hospital. Something inside her had hardened, not into bitterness, but into resolve. And that resolve, quiet as it was, would soon force others to realize that underestimating her had been a serious mistake. After her release from the hospital, Kate's behavior subtly changed. Nothing dramatic, nothing that could be questioned outright. But those who knew her well noticed it immediately. Her smile returned, but it no longer reached her eyes. According to accounts from inside the palace, Kate became more selective, more measured. She limited conversations. She reduced access. And most importantly, she listened more than she spoke. Every interaction became information. When Camilla entered the room, Kate was calm, respectful, unreactive. There was no confrontation, no visible tension, but the absence of warmth was unmistakable. Sources claim Kate stopped sharing personal details entirely. No health updates, no private thoughts, no vulnerabilities, because vulnerability, she had learned, was currency, and it could be spent by others without her consent. Behind the scenes, Kate reportedly reconnected with individuals she trusted. Quietly, people who had been distanced during her hospitalization, people who were surprised to hear from her again. The pattern became clear. What had been altered while she was away was being restored, slowly, carefully, without announcement. According to one insider, Kate said very little during this time, but when she did speak, her words were precise. "I'm fine now," she reportedly said, "but I won't be uninformed again." That sentence carried weight, because it wasn't reassurance. It was a boundary. Camilla, according to multiple accounts, seemed to sense a shift. Interactions became formal, brief, transactional. The ease that once existed was gone. And yet, nothing could be openly challenged, because everything had been done properly. Everything had been logged. Everything could be defended as protocol. But Kate now understood something essential. Protocol can hide intent, and intent, once exposed, cannot be unseen. Those close to her say she no longer sought approval. She no longer waited to be included. She positioned herself where decisions were made. And while no one spoke about the guard again, his words lingered, because they had done what no warning ever could. They had opened her eyes. And once opened, they did not close again. As weeks passed, the atmosphere around Kate quietly tightened. Nothing was said out loud, but everything felt different. According to those nearby, she moved with intention now. Every appearance planned, every meeting timed, every silence deliberate. Kate was no longer reacting. She was anticipating. The emotional collapse that began in the hospital had transformed into something else entirely. Not revenge, not confrontation, awareness. She reportedly began requesting briefings that had never included her before, not demanding them, expecting them. And surprisingly, no one refused. because refusing would have raised questions. Camilla, according to accounts, remained composed, courteous, careful, but the dynamic had shifted. Where Kate once deferred, she now paused. Where she once accepted explanations, she now asked for clarification. And every clarification narrowed the space for quiet control. One source claims Kate made a private remark during this period. Not emotional, not bitter, just factual. I know what happens when I'm not present. That statement required no follow-up. It acknowledged the past without naming it, and it signaled that the past would not repeat. Behind closed doors, Kate's trust circle grew smaller, but stronger. Fewer voices, clearer loyalties. The guard's role was never mentioned again, but his impact was permanent, because his account had given Kate something she hadn't realized she'd lost: agency. According to insiders, Kate no longer measured her actions by harmony alone. She measured them by consequence. And while the palace continued to present unity to the outside world, inside, lines had been redrawn. Quietly, irreversibly, Kate no longer cried over what had been done. She no longer questioned why it happened. She had accepted the truth. And acceptance, in her case, did not mean surrender. It meant control. And those who underestimated her during her weakest moment were only beginning to understand what that mistake would cost. Time did what emotion could not. It settled the shock into clarity. Kate no longer revisited the moment she collapsed crying. She remembered it, but she did not live in it. According to those close to her, that breakdown became a line in her life. Before it, she believed protection came from goodwill. After it, she understood protection came from awareness. The palace adjusted to her change without ever naming it. Schedules aligned around her presence. Briefings waited for her availability, not because anyone apologized, but because ignoring her was no longer easy. Camilla, according to accounts, remained publicly unchanged, poised, unbothered, careful with every word. But privately, the space around Kate had closed. There were fewer opportunities for quiet decisions, fewer moments when information could bypass her. Kate had learned the cost of absence, and she would not pay it again. One insider described her demeanor during this period as calm, almost serene. Not the calm of peace, the calm of certainty. She no longer needed explanations for what had happened in the hospital. She no longer waited for acknowledgement, because acknowledgement would not undo it. Instead, she focused forward. Every appearance reinforced stability. Every interaction reinforced presence. She was seen. She was heard. She was counted. And perhaps most importantly, she was no longer underestimated. The tears that once left her breathless had stripped away illusion. What remained was resolve, quiet, controlled, unmistakable. According to those who observed the shift, Kate had not hardened. She had sharpened. And in an institution where power often moves unseen, that change mattered. Because from that point on, nothing involving her happened without her knowing. And that, more than any confrontation, was the real consequence of what was done while she lay in a hospital bed. By the time months had passed, the story of Kate's collapse was no longer spoken about, but its effect remained. According to accounts, she had reached a place beyond emotion. No anger, no grief, just clarity. Kate no longer tried to repair what had been broken. She accepted that some fractures are permanent, and that pretending otherwise only weakens you. Those around her noticed she no longer sought reassurance. She didn't look for validation in nods or smiles. Her confidence came from knowing, not approval. The guard's words had given her a rare advantage: truth without polish, observation without loyalty. And that truth had rewired how she moved within the palace. Conversations became shorter. Decisions became firmer. Ambiguity disappeared. Camilla, according to insiders, adjusted as well, not through words, but through distance. Their interactions remained civil, structured, unavoidable, but the emotional access was gone. Kate no longer played the role of mediator. She no longer absorbed discomfort to keep peace, because peace, she had learned, can come at a personal cost. Behind the scenes, Kate's presence altered the balance. not through authority, but through inevitability. She was included because excluding her no longer worked. According to one account, someone close to the situation quietly remarked that Kate had become impossible to move around. And that was intentional. The moment she collapsed crying had marked the end of her unguarded self. The woman who trusted timing. The woman who believed patience would be returned. That woman did not come back from a hospital. In her place stood someone composed, aware, and unignorable. Kate did not need to confront what Camilla did. She did not need to name it, because everyone involved already understood. The silence between them said enough. And in that silence, Kate had found something stronger than trust. Control. In time, the palace settled into a new rhythm, outwardly unchanged. Internally adjusted, Kate became a constant, not dominant, not demanding, unavoidable. According to those watching closely, her presence now shaped decisions before they were ever finalized, not through insistence, but through expectation. If she wasn't informed, the process felt incomplete. If she wasn't present, the timing was questioned. This was not power seized. It was power recognized. The memory of the hospital lingered quietly in her mind, not as pain, but as reference, a reminder of what absence allowed. And so she made sure absence never happened again. Camilla, according to accounts, maintained her role with precision. No missteps, no overreach. The distance between them remained steady and unmistakable. There were no private conversations to clear the air, no emotional reckoning, because what had been lost was not a misunderstanding. It was certainty. Kate no longer wondered where she stood. She no longer questioned intentions. She understood them. And understanding changed everything. One insider described her as immovable without being rigid, always polite, always composed, but never passive. The guard's words had never been repeated. They didn't need to be. They had done their work. They had stripped illusion from loyalty and replaced it with awareness. And awareness, once gained, cannot be taken back. Kate didn't seek sympathy for what she endured. She didn't reference her tears. Those tears belonged to a moment that had already served its purpose. They marked the end of not knowing. From that point forward, every step she took was deliberate, every silence chosen, every smile measured, because she had learned the most important lesson of all. In places where power moves quietly, clarity is protection. And Kate, having collapsed once, would never again be caught unaware. With clarity came restraint. Kate no longer felt the need to prove anything. According to those around her, she understood that visibility itself was influence. Simply being present changed outcomes. Simply listening altered direction. She chose her moments carefully. Not every thought was shared. Not every concern voiced. Because silence, when informed, becomes powerful. The palace adapted without announcement. People adjusted their language around her. Meetings slowed when she entered. Assumptions were checked. Kate noticed everything. Not with suspicion, with awareness. The memory of being spoken about while she lay unaware in a hospital bed never fully faded. But it no longer hurt. It instructed. She no longer relied on trust alone. She relied on structure, on information, on timing. Camilla's presence, according to accounts, remained steady but contained. Nothing crossed unspoken lines. Both understood where those lines now existed, and neither needed to acknowledge them. Kate's emotional collapse had become something else in hindsight, a release, a breaking point that made rebuilding possible. Those close to her say she no longer internalized tension. She no longer absorbed discomfort for the sake of balance. Balance, she realized, had often been one-sided. Now it wasn't. The guard faded back into anonymity, his role complete. But the truth he revealed continued to shape outcomes long after his words were spoken. Kate did not revisit the past publicly. She did not seek validation for her experience. Because she no longer needed anyone to believe her. She believed herself. And that belief changed how she moved, how she decided, and how others responded. What began as collapse ended as command. Quiet, measured, unquestioned. And from that point on, nothing involving Kate happened in shadows. Everything moved where she could see it, exactly as she intended. Over time, Kate's approach became almost invisible in its effect. She did not announce authority. She did not draw attention. Yet everything adjusted around her presence. Those familiar with the palace routines describe her as strategically silent, her words chosen with precision, her reactions measured, her observations constant. Every meeting, every briefing, every interaction now carried her awareness. No decision occurred without consideration of her perspective. No schedule was adjusted without her knowledge. The guard's revelations had created a shift that could never be undone. Kate's collapse in the hospital was no longer remembered as weakness. It was remembered as a turning point, the moment that forced clarity, vigilance, and calculated influence. According to insiders, Kate no longer second-guessed intentions. She no longer relied solely on assurances. She relied on knowledge. And knowledge, she realized, was power. Camilla's influence continued, but it was no longer unchecked. Where previously subtle shifts had been unnoticed, now they were accounted for. Every action observed, every interaction noted. Kate reportedly reflected privately on the experience. She admitted that the pain of betrayal had been immense, but she also acknowledged the lesson it carried. A lesson about presence, observation, and self-protection. The emotional collapse, once uncontrollable, became a private reminder, not shameful, not regrettable, necessary. It had revealed vulnerabilities, and through them, it had revealed a new strength. Insiders claim that Kate's calm demeanor now masked constant awareness, her gestures measured, her interactions deliberate, her silence at times louder than words. What began as tears in a hospital room evolved into a force that could not be ignored. Kate had learned that visibility itself is influence, and that influence, once established, changes outcomes silently but irrevocably. From that moment on, Kate controlled not only her own position, but also how the palace moved around her. Quietly, strategically, irrevocably. Her collapse had been the catalyst. Her resolve became the legacy. And nothing would ever proceed in ignorance of her again. The corridor was not meant for grief. It was designed for control. Lights glowed softly against polished marble, every surface sterile, every sound subdued, engineered silence and forced calm. Machines hung behind sealed doors, their rhythm steady, indifferent, obedient. In this place, even suffering followed protocol. Kate stood alone in that restricted hospital wing, her name powerful enough to open doors, yet useless against what had already been decided. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from the realization that something had happened while she was powerless to stop it. A palace guard waited nearby, still, silent, perfectly aligned with centuries of discipline. When she finally spoke, her voice broke the rules. "You hesitated." The guard did not answer at first, because hesitation inside the palace is dangerous. It means thought. It means conscience. And conscience has no clearance level. What he had seen during the blackout window was never meant to be witnessed. Not by him. Not by anyone who still believed dignity was protected by rank. As the silence stretched, Kate understood something chilling. This wasn't a failure of security. It was a success. And what the guard was about to reveal would expose how quietly power moves, when it believes no one will dare to remember. The silence did not arrive suddenly. It settled, slowly, deliberately, like something trained to wait. Inside the restricted hospital wing, the air carried the sterile scent of antiseptic and polished stone. Lights glowed at a calibrated warmth, neither harsh nor comforting, designed to reveal without inviting attention. Every surface reflected control. Every sound was measured, muted, disciplined. This was not a place built for vulnerability. It was built for containment. Kate stood near the doorway of a private medical room, her back to glass, her reflection faint and distorted. The machines behind her breathed steadily, each soft mechanical exhale marking time with indifferent precision. The monitors did not care who she was. They responded only to signals, thresholds, permissions. Her hands were clenched tightly at her sides. Across the corridor, a palace guard remained at his post, motionless, aligned perfectly with the geometry of the floor. His uniform was immaculate, pressed sharp enough to suggest certainty where none existed. His presence was meant to reassure. to signal order, to remind anyone passing that this space was governed, watched, and secure. Yet something had already gone wrong. Kate broke first. You hesitated. Her voice did not rise. It did not accuse. It simply existed, raw, unfiltered, human. And in this place, that alone was a disruption. The guard did not turn immediately. Protocol dictated that he should not. His duty was the corridor, not the person standing behind him, not the grief he could feel without seeing, not the weight pressing into the silence between them. I was verifying access clearance, ma'am. He said at last. The word ma'am landed between them like a shield. Respectful, impersonal, safe. Kate exhaled slowly. Her reflection in the glass trembled. Everyone keeps saying that, she replied, as if repeating it makes it true. The guard's jaw tightened, barely perceptible. His eyes remained forward, fixed on nothing and everything at once. The corridor stretched long and narrow, its architecture intentional. No windows, no distractions, no corners where uncertainty could hide. This wing belonged to Crown. It existed outside public schedules, outside ordinary accountability. Here, authority did not announce itself. It simply moved. Kate turned to face him fully. When I asked to see the logs, she said, they told me there were no irregularities. A pause. And yet, she continued, you hesitated. The guard shifted his weight almost imperceptibly. A lifetime of training warned him of the danger in this moment. Conversations like this did not happen here. Questions were answered before they were asked, or never at all. I acted within instruction, he replied. Kate's eyes searched his face, not for reassurance. For truth. Did you? She asked. The machines behind her emitted a soft alert. Routine, meaningless, perfectly timed. The sound seemed to underline the moment, reminding them both that life inside this room was being measured in increments neither of them controlled. The guard swallowed. I saw something, he said. The words escaped quietly. Too quietly. Kate froze. For a brief moment, even the machines seemed to recede, their rhythm fading beneath the weight of what had just been spoken. You saw something? She asked. The guard closed his eyes for half a second. Long enough to acknowledge the line he had crossed, short enough to pretend he had not. I was posted during the blackout window, he said. Corridor C. Kate's breath caught. That corridor was sealed, she replied immediately. I was told no one entered. That was the instruction, the guard said. Yes, but, she pressed. There was an override. The words settled heavily between them. Kate felt the corridor narrow, the walls closing in as understanding began to form. Not clearly, not completely, but enough to hurt. Medical? She asked. That's how it was logged. She turned back toward the glass, pressing her palm against it. The room beyond remained softly lit, the figure inside barely visible through the blur. Vulnerability reduced to shadows and machines. Whose authorization? She asked quietly. The guard hesitated again, longer this time. I can't say the name, he replied. Not aloud. The implication was unmistakable. Kate's shoulders sank, not in defeat but in recognition. So it wasn't a mistake, she said. It was deliberate. The guard said nothing. She nodded slowly, her reflection fractured by the glass. They isolated me, she murmured. At the exact moment I couldn't object. The guard finally turned to face her fully. His eyes carried something rare in palace service. Not defiance, not loyalty, but fracture. I was instructed to forget what I witnessed, he said. Kate turned sharply. Instructed, she repeated. Yes. By whom went unspoken. The corridor absorbed the silence that followed. Somewhere beyond its walls, life continued uninterrupted. Schedules held. Orders flowed downward. The institution functioned as it always had. Smooth, quiet, unyielding. Kate felt tears rise, uninvited and unwelcome. She did not wipe them away. They used my weakness, she said. Didn't they? The guard answered honestly. They used timing. A distant door opened and closed. Footsteps echoed faintly, then faded. No one stopped. No one looked. Kate straightened. If this was authorized, she said slowly, then protocol didn't fail. The guard remained still. It succeeded. Her voice did not break this time. And if protocol succeeded, she continued, then dignity was never part of the design. The guard drew a careful breath. There's something else, he said. Kate met his gaze. The authorization level, he continued, was discretionary. The meaning landed with devastating clarity. They chose the moment, she whispered. Yes. The silence that followed was different now. Not empty. Charged. Kate wiped her face, her movements controlled, practiced. Composure reclaimed not through comfort, but necessity. If you're questioned, she said, what will you say? The guard turned back toward the corridor, resuming his post as footsteps approached again in the distance. I will say, he replied evenly, that nothing out of the ordinary occurred. Kate nodded once. And if you're not questioned? A pause. Then I will remember. The footsteps passed. Authority moved on. The corridor returned to stillness, but the silence no longer obeyed. The corridor did not remember motion. It remembered procedure. By morning, the silence of the restricted wing had been restored to its approved state. Quiet not from absence, but from control. Cleaning staff moved through without conversation. Senior aides passed without pause. The machines inside the rooms continued their steady rhythm, indifferent to what had been spoken the night before. Kate had not slept. She sat alone now in a smaller consultation chamber, one level above the wing, where the walls were paneled and muted with instead of glass. This room was designed for briefings, not comfort, for explanations delivered without accountability. The events of the night replayed in fragments, hesitation, the word override, the guard's fractured composure. None of it existed on paper. None of it would, unless someone allowed it to. A file lay closed on the table before her. No markings. No name. Just wait. Across from her sat a senior medical administrator, hands folded neatly, posture flawless. He spoke calmly, precisely, as though describing a system that could never betray the people inside it. All access protocols were followed, he said. There were no breaches. Kate listened without interrupting. The blackout window was scheduled in advance, he continued, approved under continuity safeguards. Temporary overrides were issued where medically appropriate. She leaned forward slightly. Who issued them, she asked. The administrator's eyes did not flicker. Authorization is tiered, he replied, not individual. Kate exhaled through her nose. In other words, she said, no one is responsible. That is not what I said, he corrected gently. Responsibility exists within structure. Structure. The word echoed uncomfortably. Kate stood and walked to the window, though there was nothing to see beyond reinforced glass and carefully landscaped stone. The palace grounds were immaculate. Paths trimmed, fountains flowing on schedule, continuity preserved through design. How many people entered the wing last night? She asked. The administrator consulted a tablet. 4, he replied. All approved. And the logs? She asked. Sealed, he said. As standard. Kate turned back to him. Sealed from whom? He hesitated. Only a fraction. From her view outside necessity. The answer was perfect. Meaningless. Impenetrable. She nodded slowly. So if I request access, she said, it becomes unnecessary. Not unnecessary, he replied. Redundant. Kate felt the familiar pressure return, the sensation being carefully boxed in by language designed to sound reasonable. Redundancy protects the system, she said quietly, not the people inside it. The administrator said nothing. The meeting ended without resolution. It was never meant to resolve anything. Later, as afternoon light filtered weakly through the upper corridors, Kate walked alone to the palace interior. Portraits watched from the walls. Generations preserved in oil and gold. Expressions fixed in dignified restraint. None of them showed uncertainty. None of them appeared vulnerable. This building was not designed to acknowledge weakness. It absorbed it, redirected it, used it. Behind a secure service door, the palace guard from the night before stood waiting. His reassignment had been subtle, not disciplinary, procedural. He now manned an interior checkpoint, away from the hospital wing, away from cameras that asked too many questions. Kate approached him without ceremony. They told me nothing was wrong, she said. The guard did not react. They would, he replied. She studied him. You remember the logs, she said. How they work. Yes. Tell me what's missing. The guard hesitated, then answered carefully. During a blackout window, entries are time-stamped but not cross-signed, he said. That requires a secondary review. And if the review never happens? Then the entry exists, he replied, but without confirmation. Kate felt a slow chill. A ghost record, she murmured. Yes. She met his eyes. Does one exist? The guard nodded once. One, he said, for minutes long. For minutes. In a system where nothing moved without reason. For minutes was an eternity. Why hasn't it been signed? She asked. Because signing it would acknowledge discretion, he replied. And discretion implies choice. Kate understood immediately. Choice meant accountability. And accountability, she said, creates risk. The guard said nothing. That evening, a quiet internal notice circulated through senior staff. No alarms, no urgency, just a procedural anomaly flagged for clarification. A missing signature. It should have been corrected within minutes. Instead, it lingered behind closed doors. Discussions began not about what happened, but about how much needed to be known. Legal advisors spoke of precedent. Security heads spoke of optics. No one spoke of Kate. She sat alone again later that night, reviewing old briefing materials she had once skimmed without thought. Continuity acts, emergency discretion clauses, authority hierarchies designed for moments of instability. Moments like this. She realized then that what frightened her most was not the intrusion, but how ordinary it was. This had happened before. Not to her, perhaps, but to others. Quietly, efficiently, without record. The palace was not cruel. It was consistent. When she finally rose, her expression had changed, not hardened but clarified. The guard's words returned to her. They chose the moment. And now, because of a missing signature, the moment had chosen them back. The palace did not react loudly. It never did. Instead, it adjusted quietly, almost imperceptibly, as institutions do when pressure enters their frame. Meetings appeared on calendars without explanation. Routes were altered by meters, not miles. People who once crossed paths daily began missing one another by minutes. Loyalty was not questioned. It was repositioned. Kate sensed a shift before anyone spoke to her. It revealed itself in pauses that lasted a second too long, in answers delivered with excessive precision, in the sudden carefulness with which her presence was acknowledged. She had not been isolated, but she was no longer central. The anomaly had been flagged. That much she knew. What followed was not investigation, but containment disguised as diligence. In a conference room deep within the administrative wing, senior aides gathered around a polished table that reflected nothing clearly. No names were spoken aloud. No accusations formed. The discussion circled language, risk, continuity, precedent. We are not addressing an incident. One advisor said evenly, we are addressing interpretation. Across the table, a security official nodded. The system functioned. Precisely, another added, which is why it must not be reframed. Outside that room, the guard waited. He had been summoned without explanation. The message was procedural, impersonal. He stood now in a smaller office than before, walls bare, chair uninviting. Across from him sat an officer he had trained under years earlier. You understand why you're here, the officer said. Yes, the guard replied. No, the officer corrected gently. You understand what this looks like. The guard remained silent. You were on duty during a blackout window, the officer continued. A sealed corridor experienced authorized movement. A record exists without secondary confirmation. The guard nodded once. That happens, the officer said. Rarely, but it happens. Yes, the guard replied. It does. A pause. You spoke to her, the officer said. The statement was not a question. Yes. The officer leaned back slightly. That was not required. No, nor advised. No. The silence tightened. What exactly did you say? The officer asked. The guard chose his words carefully. I confirmed that an override occurred, he said. Nothing more. The officer studied him. Did you speculate? No. Did you assign motive? No. Another pause. Did you suggest impropriety? The guard met his gaze. I suggested discretion, he said. The officer's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. Discretion, he repeated, is not a failing. No, the guard agreed, but it is a choice. The room cooled. You are aware, the officer said slowly, that choices imply judgment. Yes. And judgment, he continued, is not your function. The guard did not respond. He was dismissed shortly after, not reprimanded, not praised, simply removed from immediate proximity to relevance. Loyalty, it seemed, was still intact, but something had shifted. Elsewhere, Kate sat with an aide she had known for years. The woman's voice was calm, her concern carefully modulated. They are being cautious, the aide said. That is all. About what? Kate asked. About precedent. Kate smiled faintly. Precedent doesn't feel cautious, she said. It feels deliberate. The aide hesitated. There are protections in place, she offered. For whom? Kate asked. The aide did not answer. That night, Kate stood alone in a private archive room rarely accessed except during ceremonial preparations. Shelves lined the walls, heavy with bound volumes and sealed cases. The air smelled of old paper and polish. Here, history was preserved without commentary. She ran her fingers along the spine of a ledger detailing discretionary authority during periods of vulnerability, illness, succession uncertainty, temporary incapacity. Each entry was concise, clinical, bloodless, no emotions, no names, only outcomes. She realized then that what had happened was not personal. That made it worse. This was not malice. It was maintenance. Behind her, the door opened softly. The guard stood there, posture correct, expression unreadable. They've reassigned me again, he said quietly. Where? She asked. External rotation, he replied. Temporary. Kate nodded. That means distance, she said. Yes. And silence. Yes. She turned to face him. They won't punish you, she said. Not openly. No. But they will remind you where you belong. The guard hesitated. I submitted a statement, he said. Kate froze. A protected one, he continued. Internal review channel. The words settled slowly. That was unwise, she said. Yes. Why did you do it? The guard's voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed exhaustion. Because silence had already chosen a side. Kate closed her eyes briefly. Do you know what this will do? She asked. Yes. It will not protect you. No. It will not change the outcome. No. A beat. Then why? The guard looked past her, toward shells heavy with inherited authority. Because loyalty, he said, should fracture before it disappears. Kate studied him for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was quiet, resolute. Then we are no longer pretending, she said. No, he agreed. Outside the archive, the palace remained calm. Lights glowed. Schedules held. Public life continued untouched. But internally, something had been set in motion that could not be recalled. The statement moved upward, slowly, cautiously, passing through hands trained to weigh consequence above truth. Each reader understood the danger not of exposure, but of acknowledgement. The fracture was not loud. It was precise, and it was irreversible. The palace did not close ranks in response to the statement. It opened files. Quietly, methodically, without emotion. Rooms long in use are prepared again. Lamps switched on. Safes unsealed. Documents lifted from shelves where they had rested undisturbed for decades. This was not panic. It was memory reasserting itself. The institution did not ask whether it had acted correctly. It asked only whether it had acted consistently. Kate felt the shift immediately. The air around her changed, not in temperature, but in gravity. Conversations grew formal again. Familiarity retreated behind title and posture. Even sympathy, when offered, arrived wrapped in caution. She was not excluded. She was contextualized. In a private sitting room overlooking the inner courtyard, Kate sat alone as dusk settled outside. The stone below caught the fading light, each surface absorbing shadow with dignified restraint. The courtyard had witnessed coronations, farewells, moments of celebration and grief. It remembered everything, yet spoke of nothing. A folder lay open on the table before her. Inside were copies, sanitized, redacted, precise. Excerpts from archival directives issued during prior moments of institutional vulnerability. Illness, absence, transition. Each directive bore the same signature line, sometimes filled, sometimes not. The language was unmistakable. Discretion in the interest of continuity. Kate read slowly, deliberately, as if pacing herself through something heavier than information. These were not scandals. They were patterns. What had happened to her was not an aberration. It was inheritance. A knock came at the door. Soft, measured. A senior advisor entered, closing it carefully behind him. This review will remain internal, he said, without preamble. That is not a threat. It is a safeguard. Kate did not look up. For whom? She asked. For the institution, he replied. Which includes you. She finally raised her eyes. Does it? She asked quietly. The advisor hesitated. There are moments, he said, when individual discomfort must be weighed against structural stability. Kate nodded. And who decides when a person becomes a risk? History, he replied. She gestured toward the folder. This history, she said, was written by people who never faced the consequences of their decisions. The advisor said nothing. Elsewhere, behind secure doors, the protected statement moved through its final stage. Legal counsel assessed exposure. Security chiefs assessed vulnerability. No one disputed the facts. They debated impact. The guard was not present. He had been placed on extended rotation, his absence framed as routine. No accusations followed him. No commendations either. He existed now in the margins, acknowledged only by implication. Kate understood the message clearly. This is how the palace punished without appearing to punish. That night, she returned to the hospital wing, not to confront, not to demand, to remember. The corridor looked unchanged. Clean, controlled, perfectly quiet. She stood where she had stood before, her reflection faint against the glass. The machines inside continued their steady rhythm, unaware that their presence had become symbolic. She realized then that the deepest wound was not intrusion. It was erasure. Her experience had been absorbed, translated into language that removed its human weight, reduced the procedure, justified by precedent. She pressed her hand to the glass again. This is what the crown weighs, she whispered. Not gold, not ceremony, silence. In the days that followed, conclusions formed without announcement, roles adjusted, responsibilities redistributed. The anomaly was explained in terms that satisfied continuity without admitting harm. No apology was issued. None was required. Kate met the advisor one final time. The director will remain classified, he said, but it will not be repeated. She considered this. That is not justice, she said. No, he agreed. It is balance. She rose, her expression composed. Balance, she said, always requires someone to carry the weight. The advisor watched her leave without attempting to stop her. The palace exhaled. Order, once again, appeared restored. But the crown, ancient, unmoving, had shifted imperceptibly, and those who felt it would never forget the strain. Order did not return all at once. It was reassembled. Quiet notices circulated through internal channels, brief, unremarkable, written in language so careful it almost disappeared as it was read. Assignments were adjusted. Oversight committees dissolved as discreetly as they had been convened. The review was concluded without ceremony, without record that could be easily traced. The palace resumed its rhythm. From the outside, nothing had changed. Engagements proceeded. Public schedules remained intact. The crown appeared steady, untouched by disruption. Inside, the cost was measured differently. Kate felt in the subtle recalibration of her days. Meetings shortened. Decisions pre-aligned before reaching her. Access granted promptly, but only to what was deemed necessary. She had not been diminished in title. She had been clarified. In a private audience chamber, she stood before a mirror framed in guilt and shadow. The woman looking back at her appeared composed, untroubled, every gesture precise. This was the image the institution preserved. What it could not preserve was certainty. She thawed the guard. No announcement had marked his reassignment. No explanation followed. His absence became simply another adjustment. Noticed briefly, then absorbed. The palace did not erase people. It repositioned them until memories softened. A senior aide entered quietly. "The matter is considered resolved," the aide said. Kate nodded. "And the directive?" she asked. "Archived," came the reply. "Restricted access." She exhaled slowly. "And the statement?" The aide paused. "Contained." The word settled heavily. That afternoon, Kate walked alone to the outer gallery where public tours occasionally passed under watchful supervision. Today it was empty. Sunlight filtered through high windows, illuminating stone floors worn smooth by centuries of procession. She stopped before a portrait of a monarch long dead, eyes steady, expression unreadable. "He held power," she murmured, "but never allowed it to look like force." The palace understood this lesson well. Force created resistance. Procedure created compliance. Later, in a final private briefing, the advisor spoke plainly. "No further action will be taken," he said. "The risk has been neutralized." Kate met his gaze. "Neutralized," she repeated, "or silenced." The advisor did not correct her. "Continuity has been preserved," he said instead. She nodded once. "And the truth?" she asked. The advisor hesitated. "Preserved," he said, differently. Kate understood. That evening, as lights warmed the palace corridors, she stood at her window overlooking the grounds. The fountains flowed on schedule. Guards changed shifts with mechanical precision. The institution breathed, steady and untroubled. She felt no victory, only clarity. Justice had not been denied. It had been negotiated. She had not lost, but she had not been allowed to win. Kate straightened her shoulders. This was the price of belonging to something older than conscience, broader than individual pain. The palace would survive because it always had, and those within it would adapt, because that was the only way to remain. Behind her, the room was silent. Ahead, the future waited, carefully shaped, carefully controlled. Silence in the palace was never empty. It was deliberate. It lived in the pauses between footsteps, in the measured cadence of voices trained never to reveal urgency. It settled into stone and wood, into tapestries that had absorbed centuries of secrets without ever loosening their threads. Silence was not absence here. It was function. By morning, the institution had completed its work. No statements were issued. None were required. The palace returned to its ceremonial rhythm with practiced ease, each movement precise, each gesture reaffirming continuity. The narrative presented to the world remained intact. Order, dignity, stability. Inside, the truth rested where it always had. Contained, unspoken. Kate stood alone in the same upper corridor where days earlier her understanding of the palace had shifted. The light was softer now, filtered through high windows that allowed illumination without exposure. She had learned the lesson embedded in that design. Visibility without vulnerability. She moved slowly, deliberately, as though walking through memory rather than space. Every corner carried weight now. Not emotional excess, but awareness. She no longer searched the palace for reassurance. She observed it with clarity. The guard did not return. His absence became permanent in the quiet way the palace preferred, not erased, but folded neatly into institutional distance. His protected statement remained filed, referenced only in internal precedent. He had fulfilled his duty in a way the palace could tolerate only once. Kate understood this without being told. In a private chamber reserved for reflection rather than governance, she sat as dusk approached. The room held no documents, no directives, only inherited stillness. This was where members of the crown came not to decide, but to endure. She thought of her tears in the hospital wing, not as weakness, as evidence. The palace did not punish emotion. It absorbed it, reclassified it, and redistributed its costs across silence. This was how it survived revolutions, scandals, collapse. Human moments were allowed, briefly, then translated into structure. Kate placed her hands in her lap, breathing evenly. She realized that the greatest power of the institution was not control over movement or access, but over memory. what was remembered, how it was framed, and what was never given language. History here was not written loudly. It was curated. Outside, bells marked the hour, soft, distant, ceremonial. The sound echoed across stone, reminding the city beyond the gates that stability endured. Kate rose. She had not been broken. She had been instructed. The palace did not demand loyalty through fear. It cultivated it through inheritance, through the quiet understanding that belonging required endurance without recognition. As she moved toward the window, she felt the full weight of what the crown truly carried. Not jewels, not authority, human restraint. She placed a hand against the glass, watching the lights come on below. Guards moved into position. Life continued, measured and unremarkable. Her tears, when they came again, were silent. They fell not for what had been taken, but for what had been learned. That dignity inside the palace was protected only when it remained invisible. That justice existed, but only in forms that did not threaten continuity. That silence was both shield and prison. The palace would never speak of what had happened, but it would remember, and so would she. The palace gates never sleep. They swing open and close in precise rhythm, welcoming and denying passage with equal measure. The stone walls stand unyielding, but shadows move differently here, elongated, patient, carrying knowledge that no visitor is ever meant to witness. Kate returned to the outer courtyard that evening, her steps measured. Each footfall against the polished stone echoed faintly, a reminder that even in openness, the palace claimed sound as carefully as it claimed silence. The fountains flowed without interruption, their water catching lantern light, like a promise of continuity. Yet the air felt different tonight, heavier, as though the palace itself were leaning forward, observing. Inside, corridors hummed with activity unseen. Meetings held behind closed doors produced no public announcement. Decisions were made that would ripple outward without leaving fingerprints. Discretion, once spoken of abstractly, had taken shape as action. Kate understood the structure now, not as a shield, but as a weight. Every role, every title, every minor adjustment was a calculated placement within a lattice that ensured survival above all else. Compassion, protocol, loyalty, they were interchangeable tools depending on who wielded them. The guard's protected statement had been filed, the anomaly catalogued. Those directly involved were repositioned, appearances maintained. Yet, Kate felt a subtle tension everywhere she looked. Not everyone had agreed silently. Not everyone had accepted quietly. She moved past the administrative wing toward the service corridors. Here, lights were dimmer, voices softer, and shadows stretched long along the walls. This was where discretion became tangible. Doors that never opened to outsiders creaked slightly, revealing glimpses of conversations and gestures that betrayed unease. A security officer passed her, acknowledging her with a brief nod, but no conversation. His eyes flickered, not in recognition, but in a question unasked. How much do we obey, and when does obedience fracture? Kate continued onward, knowing that the palace functioned not only through rules, but through fear cloaked in civility. Hierarchy was maintained through restraint, but restraint could fracture, and when it did, it left an indelible mark. In the far wing, she paused at a door marked Archives Restricted. Inside were records of every discretionary action, every unspoken correction, every moment when silence had been the only verdict allowed. She traced her fingers along the surface, imagining the hands that had written these records, the people who had weighed risk against conscience, the ones who had been forced to adapt or vanish quietly. A soft step behind her. She did not turn. You shouldn't be here, a voice whispered, not accusatory, observational. Careful. Kate did not flinch. Neither should anyone, she replied. The guard emerged from the shadows. His uniform remained immaculate, posture disciplined, yet something in his eyes betrayed a subtle fatigue, a consciousness weighed down by the knowledge that survival required compliance, but conscience required memory. Have you read them? She asked. Enough, he said. Enough to know discretion never belongs to the individual. Kate nodded. Yes, she said. And that loyalty is not given. It's assumed until someone decides it isn't. They stood together in silence, the corridor's dim light tracing their outlines, the palace breathing around them like a patient organism. Outside, the gates glimmered faintly in lantern glow, sealing the boundary between the world that knew and the world that never would. "What now?" Kate asked finally. The guard did not answer immediately. He did not need to. In the palace, action is measured by consequence, not urgency. And consequence, once set in motion, travels quietly but inexorably. "They will test it," he said at last. "Test what remains loyal and what fractures under pressure." Kate exhaled slowly. She had learned that lesson the hard way. Every decision, every hesitation, every protected word carried weight. Loyalty could fracture, discretion could fail, and yet the palace itself would endure, unchallenged, patient, and absolute. She turned toward the archives once more, tracing the door with her hand. The records inside would not speak aloud. No one outside these walls would know. But inside, memory had been preserved. And memory, she realized, was the truest form of power the palace held. The shadows lengthened. The corridors pulsed with unseen motion. History, discretion, and authority intertwined, forming the lattice upon which the crown rested. Kate and the guard walked slowly toward the inner gates, their steps deliberate. Every movement echoed the lessons learned. That silence is survival, that protocol can wound as sharply as betrayal, and that the weight of loyalty is often carried unseen. The palace was still, but stillness did not mean peace. Within its walls, whispers traveled through corridors lined with history. Curtains drawn, portraits watching silently, floors polished to reflect light without warmth. Decisions were being made, not in public, not with fanfare, but with the certainty that every choice carried consequence. Kate moved carefully through these halls. Her steps were measured, precise, mirroring the institution she had come to understand. Every gesture mattered here, every pause, every acknowledgement. She no longer searched for allies. She looked for truth, and truth in the palace was rarely spoken. The protected statement had moved through the proper channels. Its weight was felt more than its words. Senior advisors met behind closed doors, evaluating, calculating, deliberating on how discretion and accountability intersected. Nothing could be said outside the circle, yet everything depended upon it. Kate's phone remained silent, untouched. External calls had no bearing here. Influence was measured internally. Authority functioned quietly, not through proclamation, but through controlled awareness. Every action was reviewed against precedent, every anomaly noted, every individual calibrated to maintain equilibrium. In a small briefing room, the guard was summoned again. His rotation had ended, but he had not returned to regular duties. The message was simple. Your knowledge must be applied, your discretion observed, your conscience tested. "You understand why you are here," said the senior officer, his voice steady, formal. Not interrogative, but precise. "I do," the guard replied. A dossier was placed before him. Its contents were detailed. Timelines, access logs, entries verified, signatures recorded, and anomalies highlighted. He examined it with quiet diligence. Every oversight had been documented. Every discretionary action justified. Yet between the lines, he could see the subtle fractures, gaps no one was allowed to acknowledge openly. "They are assessing the system," he said softly. "They are assessing you," the officer corrected. The guard nodded, understanding. The palace did not evaluate truth. It measured loyalty, and loyalty was tested in silence. Meanwhile, Kate traced her path through another corridor, one leading to the private archives. Her eyes scanned the shelves, old ledgers, classified memos, historical directives. She understood now. The palace never punished. It corrected. It guided. It repositioned. But it did so without exposure, without announcement, without acknowledgement. Discretion was not a choice here. It was a requirement. A familiar presence joined her, the aide who had once tried to offer reassurance. "They will close the case quietly," the aide said. Kate did not turn. "Close it," she murmured, "or bury it." "The same thing," the aide replied softly. Kate exhaled slowly. The weight of understanding settled over her. Survival here meant navigating the lattice of silence, protocol, and hierarchy. The palace had preserved order, but at a human cost that would never be recorded. She moved back toward the inner wing, where the guard waited. He had reviewed the dossier, memorized the entries, and seen the pattern. Every action, every inaction, every choice had been preserved in writing, yet none of it belonged to him. None could ever be claimed. They walked together down the corridor, silent, yet each aware of the other's understanding. The palace observed them through its architecture. The high ceilings, the heavy doors, the shadows and corners that never quite vanished. Authority was present even when absent. Power was exercised in absence as much as in command. Kate's thoughts turned inward. She had learned that the crown did not need scandal to assert itself. It did not need exposure. All it required was continuity, consistency, and discretion. Those who questioned or observed were allowed enough freedom to participate, but never enough to disrupt. Every record, every statement, every decision reinforced that lesson. The guard finally spoke. "They will render their decision quietly," he said. "And if it is unfavorable?" Kate asked. "Then it will be necessary," he replied. Necessary and contained. They paused at a threshold overlooking the courtyard. The fountains glimmered in evening light, lanterns casting shadows that moved like ghosts. The palace continued its rhythm, untouched by fear or anticipation, carrying history and consequence in equal measure. Kate realized that containment was the palace's verdict. Silence was both sentence and shield. The truth existed only in memory, carefully curated, silently acknowledged, but never fully articulated. The day closed around them. The gates remained closed. The corridors emptied. The palace breathed, steady and unbroken. And yet, within its silence, a hidden verdict had already been rendered. The palace never raised its voice. It never had to. Its authority was written into the very walls, in the polished floors, the measured echoes, and the shadows that lingered in corners where no one watched. Every step, every gesture, every command had already been anticipated, encoded into centuries of precedent. Power did not shout here. It whispered. It observed. It waited. Kate walked alone through the upper galleries, tracing the familiar lines of portraits and tapestries. Faces of monarchs long gone, advisors long silenced, and courtiers who had vanished into history watched her, as if judging the weight of what she had seen and endured. The corridors hummed softly, the stone cool beneath her fingers, the palace breathing around her like an organism aware of its own permanence. The events of the previous weeks had left subtle scars. The protected statement, the anomalies, the internal review, all had unfolded within the lattice of silence that the crown maintained. Discretion had been tested, loyalty had been questioned, and yet, outwardly, nothing had changed. But everything had. In a private chamber, she sat and reflected. The documents she had examined, the conversation she had witnessed, the silent warnings conveyed through absence and omission. They were all proof that the palace functioned not only through authority, but through the careful curation of knowledge. Some truths were meant to be preserved quietly, not announced. Some decisions were deliberate, not arbitrary. And some human costs were absorbed, measured, and catalogued, never to be spoken aloud. She thought of the guard, his service, his discretion, his courage, all invisible. His act of submitting the protected statement had set consequences in motion, yet no recognition would follow. No one outside the walls would know. He had played his role faithfully, silently, morally, and now he had been repositioned, reassigned, contained within the system that demanded both obedience and remembrance. Kate understood fully that the palace did not act through punishment or reward. It acted through survival, through quiet enforcement of principle, through the unspoken understanding that every individual was expendable in the pursuit of continuity. Loyalty here was not a choice. It was a responsibility, and failing to uphold it, even silently, was both personal and institutional. As she rose, she moved toward the archives. The doors loomed, heavy and imposing. Inside, the records awaited, thousands of entries documenting centuries of silent compliance, discretion exercised and authority preserved. Each entry was precise, clinical, yet heavy with moral consequence. The palace had always recorded what mattered, not what was seen, but what would be remembered. The guard met her there. His posture was flawless, expression controlled. Yet, beneath the surface, she could sense the weight of the decisions he had carried. The burden of discretion had not lifted, even with the statement filed. Some responsibilities were too profound to abandon. "They are finished," he said softly. "No," Kate replied. "We are finished. But the palace, it never is." She placed a hand lightly on the archives, tracing the surface. Every record was proof of human compromise, of obedience, endurance, and the quiet endurance of consequence. The crown did not need scandal to preserve itself. It needed silence. Silence was both shield and sword. The palace had wielded it, and they had survived. Outside, the gates glimmered faintly under lantern light, their shadows stretching across the stone courtyard. Guards moved with precise rhythm. The fountains continued to flow, reflecting the calm exterior that masked the moral complexity within. The institution functioned flawlessly, unaware or unconcerned, that it demanded both sacrifice and compliance from those who served it. Kate exhaled. She understood the final lesson the palace had to teach. Truth could exist without voice, loyalty could fracture without announcement, and justice could be measured not in victory, but in endurance. She turned toward the window, watching shadows lengthen across the courtyard. The last unspoken was never a failure. It was a choice, a responsibility, a command. And in the palace, that command always outlasted the individual. The palace gates opened at dawn, as they always had, yet nothing felt ordinary. The stones beneath her feet had witnessed centuries of ceremony, loyalty, and unspoken decisions. Every corridor, every chamber, every shadow carried the weight of choices made quietly, deliberately, and without recognition. Here, history was not written aloud. It was preserved in silence. Kate moved slowly through the upper galleries, tracing the familiar contours of the walls and portraits. Faces of rulers long gone watched her, expressions fixed in dignity, unyielding to the passage of time. She had walked these halls many times before, but today she understood what they had silently taught her. Endurance is the measure of power. Discretion is the ultimate authority. And those who serve must learn to navigate both without complaint. The protected statement, the anomalies, the unspoken fractures of loyalty, they had all settled into the palace's memory. No announcements were made. No public consequences followed. The crown had restored order, yet the human cost remained, intangible but undeniable. She thought of the guard, who had borne the burden of observation, judgment, and conscience without acknowledgement. His service, like so many before him, would be recorded only in the silent ledger of memory. Kate paused by the window, overlooking the inner courtyard. The fountains flowed, lanterns reflected, and the palace's rhythm continued with unshakable precision. Continuity had been preserved. The institution had endured. But she understood now that survival here was not about victory. It was about acceptance, understanding, and resilience. The lessons learned in shadows, corridors, and archives were invisible to the world outside, yet they shaped every interaction, every decision, every gesture. She turned back to the archives, fingers brushing lightly along the spines of old ledgers and redacted reports. These records were meticulous, impersonal, and yet they carried the weight of generations who had navigated the same balance. Loyalty versus conscience, procedure versus humanity, silence versus revelation. Here, the past and present converge in quiet authority. And in that convergence, Kate recognized the essence of the palace. Power measured not by spectacle, but by the patience of those who endure its demands without complaint. The guard joined her quietly, standing a respectful distance away. They did not speak immediately. Words were unnecessary. In the palace, understanding often required no language. His presence alone reminded her of the intricate dance of obedience and conscience, of the invisible ledger that each individual contributed to yet could never claim as their own. "Silence is both shield and prison," she murmured at last, almost to herself. "Yes," he said softly, "and it is also the measure of trust." She nodded, the truth of it settled in her chest with a calm heaviness. The palace did not forgive easily, nor did it punish openly. It demanded quiet comprehension, careful navigation, and moral endurance. Those who served did so in the shadows of decisions, the spaces between protocol, and the pauses in conversation. Their actions, though unrecorded publicly, shaped the institution's continuity more profoundly than any decree or proclamation ever could. Kate stepped away from the window, allowing the light of morning to fall across the floor. Every shadow, Every reflection reminded her that the crown's power existed not in gold or ceremony, but in the invisible architecture of discretion. And she understood, finally, that enduring within such a system was not about triumph or recognition. It was about aligning with the rhythm of history, moving with its silent currents, and preserving one's dignity within its framework. The guard watched her, silent and steady, a mirror of the lessons learned and burdens carried. They had witnessed a fracture, endured the uncertainty, and observed the institution's quiet recalibration. And yet in the palace, endurance was its own reward. Kate exhaled a long, deliberate breath. She had survived, not by confrontation, not by force, but by understanding the language of silence. Her tears, once private and uninvited, were now markers of comprehension, not of weakness, but of awareness. She had learned the human cost behind ceremonial stability, the quiet strength required to navigate a system older than any individual, and the moral patience demanded by power that never speaks aloud. The palace stood as it always had, immense, unyielding, and timeless. Its corridors would continue to echo with the unspoken. Its walls would remember every choice, and its gates would open and close with unerring precision. Within those walls, loyalty, discretion, and endurance would remain intertwined, shaping the lives of all who walked them quietly, invisibly, without recognition. Kate turned once more toward the inner courtyard, the morning sun reflecting off the fountains, the lantern still glowing faintly in the shadows. She understood fully that the most profound moments of power, authority, and history were often the ones never spoken aloud. And in that understanding, she found clarity, acceptance, and a deep, enduring strength.